Let's stay with this issue now and bring in legal expert Zola Majavu. Mr. Majavu, thank you so much for joining us. I think you might have heard a little bit of what my colleague Parole was just saying. These alleged rapes, attempted murder, 4 people have come forward, one of them an ex-girlfriend, as we understand, and this dates back to around 2006. Are you able to tell us anything more about this case at this point and these sorts of accusations?
Good evening, Sally, and good evening to the viewers out there. Firstly, it matters not how long ago the allegations date back. It is always open to the state to bring to book those whom they believe on the evidence before them that they might have committed certain offenses, serious or less serious. So it is really of no moment that the allegations date as far back as 2006. I guess the real test would be in the evidence on which these charges are anchored, the memory of those who might have made statements to the extent that they would be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the accused person has indeed committed these offenses, bearing in mind that there is no onus that rests on the accused person, in this case, Mr. Jub Jub, as he is commonly known, but rather the onus is on the state to bring to the fore evidence that will survive scrutiny in the form of cross-examination. But I think that it's still early days, and one would caution both the NPA and the defense from being nonchalant about this, because the charges that he is facing are quite serious indeed. They are highly scheduled charges, and in the event of a conviction, he is definitely looking at a jail term with a minimum sentence. So these are serious cases, and the NPA is also known to sensationalize matters sometimes. They would also be well advised to just stick to what they have, what they know is in the contents of the docket, because it is still early days. He's only made his first appearance. There's probably going to be a few other postponements before the matter is enrolled for the trial, where the truth on either side of the equation would come out. So I guess it's early days, but he is out on bail, as he is perfectly entitled to. He would have satisfied the court that is not a flight risk. He cooperated, and if the reports are anything to go by, he voluntarily handed himself over, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yes.
Can you clarify? I'm not sure if you know. We aren't completely sure. He was released on parole in 2017 after the murder convictions in that drag racing incident were turned on appeal to culpable homicide. Do you know if he's still on parole? I'm not sure how long parole lasts in a case like this, and whether that would have had any bearing on the fact that he got bail today.
Typically, remember, parole is still a continuation of your sentence. So if, for example, he had 5 years to go, his parole would have been for 5 years. And if that parole period has expired, for purposes of him maintaining a clean sheet, meaning non-violating his parole conditions, the slate would be wiped clean from that point of view. So for practical purposes and for bail application, he would have been treated as a person who has not violated his parole conditions. I do not know what was the balance of his term, but I can assure you that if he was still within his parole term, it would have had a direct bearing on whether or not he can be admitted to bail. The fact that he was admitted to bail without any opposition seems to suggest that he had finished his parole term, and therefore there was nothing prohibiting his application or standing in the way of him being admitted to bail. So my guess is that term had come and gone. To the extent that a question may be made or an argument might be made about, but he is a convicted offender. Yes, that may be the case, but that will only be triggered in the event that he is convicted for the current allegations. It is also interesting to note that the allegations in this particular matter would have predated him being granted on parole. So they would not necessarily play into the equation at this stage of the proceedings.
I mean, it is interesting that we're now dealing with a matter that is alleged to have happened before the drag racing incident that sent him to prison. But if we look at the allegations today, attempted murder is one of them. And if we look at what he was convicted on initially for murder and also attempted murder of the two boys who ended up with brain damage. Now, that was eventually overturned. Does that mean that the murder and the attempted murder charges simply don't exist anymore because he managed to overturn them, and therefore they would have no bearing? It's not something the court would need to consider should this new matter come to trial.
Look, as matters stand, he is a convicted person on culpable homicide. That does not go away unless it is expunged or he receives a presidential pardon. So in the event he were to be convicted on these allegations, they are closely similar, and I'm using language very loosely for the benefit of the viewers, because attempted murder is a competent conviction on murder. So in the event he was not convicted of murder, he could notionally be convicted of attempted murder or culpable homicide. In this instance, one of the charges that he is facing is attempted murder. There is a direct relation to the charge in respect of which he is already convicted. So if he were to be found guilty, that will certainly be something that the prosecution is going to make noise about, to say he is incorrigible, he does not seem to have made use of his second chance, blah, blah, blah. But we must also be very careful about the timing, because if at the time in which he was convicted, he was not subsequently convicted on similar or related charges, that may well be that the property value to be attached to his conviction may not be as high as if he is convicted, he gets given the second, and while out, either on parole or having served his parole, he re-offends again on a charge that is similar. The courts would be entitled to say, man, you don't seem to be enjoying your freedom outside. It may well be that you deserve to go back where you belong. But obviously that gets triggered only and only in the event of him being convicted for the charges that he is currently facing. So it does not mean as if he is appearing before the court as a clean person, clean in a sense of a non-convicted person. He does have a criminal record. That criminal record stays on the books until it is expunged or either by way of a presidential pardon. But for purposes of where we are today, it ought not, and I bet you my bottom rent that it did not play an adverse role in standing on his way to being admitted and subsequently being released to bail of 10,000 rand. There is absolutely nothing wrong with what has happened. But of course, it is of a public interest, mindful of the character himself, mindful of how these charges are allegedly may have been triggered, because he went on social media, he went onto that podcast, which is seen by millions of people. So naturally, when events like this happen, people will focus on the character as opposed to what the Constitution and the rule of law says about a person in his position. But I guess it is still early days, but he is well within his rights. And the state is also perfectly entitled to add further charges if information comes to light that is credible, or they may well even abandon some of the charges. The fact that he's charged on these charges now for purposes of bail does not mean that when the matter goes to trial eventually, he will be facing similar charges. There may be more, there may be less, or they may even be withdrawn along the way, depending on the preparedness of the witnesses to come forward. Or it may well be that something happens, witnesses, God forbid, pass away, and so it's still early days.
It's still very early days, no, you're quite right. And thank you so much, legal expert Zola Majavu, just really explaining so clearly what's at stake here, saying to us that this is very early days. From what Parole has told us, of course, a case is being built. And while some of these charges date back 17 years, as we have seen, and this is across the world, with people who come forward and say, I was raped X many years ago, it is more difficult to build a case, but it is not impossible, and convictions do happen.